Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Horror and LARPing panel. We have multiple guests and stars here. I'm just going to go across the screen how it looks to me. First, we have Rachel. Say hi.
Hello. Hi, I'm Rachel. I have run Boffer LARPs. I've run Parlor LARPs in uh, a variety of different contexts, and I'm looking forward to when lockdown is over and I can play and storytell again.
Very much the same here. I'm Dan. I've run LARPs for the last 3 years, and I've played in them for the last 10 or so, possibly longer, but it was weird. Um, I have a great time, and I enjoy playing horror elements into more comedic LARPs just because it's fun for me. Uh, Specifically, I like theater style for Vampire the Masquerade just because that's my bread and butter. Jacqueline?
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Bryk, or otherwise known as Jax. My pronouns are she, her. I have been writing LARPs for the past 5 years now. I won a Golden Cobra Award in 2016 for my freeform LARP The Porch. I've self-published a bunch of LARPs, and I've run LARPs at several conventions, including Midwinter, MagFest, Dreamation, DexCon, and Intercon, and I've also held a short destination LARP called Forgotten Places, which was a rural cyberpunk LARP that we played out on the eastern shore of Maryland last year, and that was super fun. And I have just started my LARP LLC, which is Ruffled Feathers, and I'm really excited to see where I can go with that, especially after lockdown finishes.
Sounds good. Matthew?
Hi, I'm Matthew Webb. I'm a creative partner over at Jackalope Live Action Studios. For the last 3 years, we've run the Night in Question, which is the official Vampire the Masquerade licensed horror LARP. I've been playing in LARP since, and I've been running them professionally or semi-professionally for the last 5 years.
And Shayne?
Hi, I'm Shayne Eastin, she, her. I am relatively new to LARP, actually, but I have been an interactive and immersive theater professional in Los Angeles for the past 7 to 8 years, and we use a lot of elements of LARP in our work. And I'm also an actor and a role player. I'm on LA by night, and I will be on Denver by night starting this week. Hey.
So the first point I wanted to get over was pacing in LARP. When is too much, and making sure you balance everything for that. Does anyone have any particular thoughts on that as a whole?
I mean, it's always important to give players a chance to sort of talk about what just happened. And I think when you're running a horror LARP, that is important, but you always want to make sure that the players feel like they don't have quite enough time. And it can be really difficult to pull that sort of pacing off, especially with a really big LARP.
Yeah,
But I think that's the ideal to shoot for.
I think you've got a very good point there. Making players feel like they should talk about what just happened for a moralistic / ethical standpoint of Fred just died or Fred got mauled and we need to talk about this because we can't keep bottling it all up, but we can't like delve into everything. We need to kind of skim the top of our feelings.
Yeah.
Helps keep them raw, at least in my opinion on the matter.
I think that one of the things that you brought up about not giving them quite enough time is that when you're dealing with horror, you have to deal with the buildup of tension. If you watch a horror movie or read a horror book, you usually don't notice it, but if you watch for it, you'll notice the amount of time it takes them to actually show you something, perhaps beyond a stinger at the very beginning, is usually quite extensive because because that release of tension for that initial horrific moment is irreplaceable. And if you read one book I can really recommend for anyone doing horror is a book called Danse Macabre by Stephen King, where he talks about like the mechanics of writing horror. And but he says it's called putting on the boogie mask. And if you don't have that pacing and you don't have that build up and you don't have that constant, like something is about to happen but hasn't happened yet, you're never gonna get that tension for the big horror payoff that you get for the big shift that happens.
I am actually going to disagree with most of
Okay.
the things that were said. I think it's actually really important that players do have enough time to talk through their feelings, because a lot of times those big emotional payoff scenes that you're going to get are not going to be your big set pieces where, for example, the evil wizards are surrounding the castle, or you're surrounded by a horde of zombies or whatever. But it's going to be those small moments where people just take one another aside and share those feelings and get into screaming arguments or just sob on each other's shoulders, and just letting them skim over their feelings, I don't think is conducive to deep and immersive LARPing.
Yeah, well, so to clarify what I meant, like, I think that you should definitely make time for those scenes that you describe. I think those are important. It's just there should always be something happening on the horizon.
Oh,
So
sure.
they feel like they didn't get quite enough time.
Joanna Picastanelli from Great Britain has this wonderful LARP that she wrote called Dawnstone, and it's actually a suspense LARP. It's not quite a horror LARP, but it is a LARP where you are camping out, and it's the last night before a final high fantasy battle. And you're never actually going to get to play out the battle because that's not the point of the LARP. But the LARP starts in the evening and goes until sunrise. And the idea is to sort of resolve or explode all of the tension that you have between these brothers or sisters or others in arms, that before you go onto the battlefield. And I think that's actually a really good representation of what you clarified.
I think
Sounds
that's
like a
a
really
great way to pace a LARP, because I think that when you're playing a game, we have this spectrum of people that we're playing with that go from passive observer to interactive participant. Some people aren't quite as in the game as other people, and so when you do have a timeline that everybody's looking for like that, people can kind of create their own arc and realize like how the pacing should be and where they're supposed to go collectively. Otherwise, you might be moving, too slow for some people, too fast for others.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. And
you shouldn't be afraid of being very, very explicit with that timeline. I found in horrors games, it's actually very useful to have an act, like you explicitly tell every player, this is the scaling up of what's going on, especially when you're talking about one shots. And you can do this in all sorts of arts, but in horror, it seems particularly useful because you can have that division between tension and action if you're going for like a traditional slasher or gore horror sort of feel. But you can do it in any game, and I think that a lot of storytellers or game masters might not want to do that because they feel it robs agency. But it's amazing how much, as Shayne pointed out, how much fluidity of action it actually gives you, how much freedom and impetus it gives you.
no, you're
Yeah.
absolutely correct. Actually having a timetable that the players know about means that they actually will start pacing themselves to the clock you've created for them. Example I like to use for that is Majora's Mask, which is a great game if you've never played it. But just knowing you have 3 days to complete everything adds a level of tension that I've never seen another game quite hit that level of tension in a kid's game where I'm like, I have 3 days. Oh God, I have 3 days.
Who's cat?
That's my cat. One moment.
If you're playing the
Oh
VHC,
no, we want to meet your cat.
if you're playing
Everyone's
the VHC drinking game, now's the time to drink.
I wish I had a cat right now so bad, man.
Oh, me too.
Such a mood.
But Matt sort of touched on something about player agency, and no matter what genre you're running. Oh, hi, kitty.
That kit's her.
Oh,
What a good void. No matter what genre you're running, cats will make
yeah,
it better.
Yeah, right?
yes. I also feel like the main goal that you have as a storyteller is like give your players the illusion of agency as they walk along the path that you have marked out for them.
Yes.
And that's really
Absolutely.
tricky. And I don't know that we can really cover that in an hour LARP.
Uh,
It's
it's
easier with
hard
a
to
horror
cover in an
game.
hour.
Yeah,
But yep.
one of my favorite LARPs that I run is called Duck and Cover, and it's an alternate universe where a nuclear bomb strike hits DC in '85, and you're all kids who are decorating the school for the prom, and you all get locked into the gym, which is also doubles as the bomb shelter. And the way I pace out that game is an hour into the game, the sirens go off. 5 minutes after that, there is a bomb sound. Then the rest of the 2 hours of the game, because it's a chamber game, are them dealing with that now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Creating a scenario and then letting the players react to a scenario that, while they did not have a choice about, it creates the impression of agency, because everything they did up to that point, everything they do after is free choice. But you've locked them into a set of rails that you know where it goes. You know they're going to be locked into that gymnasium, and how they deal with that then is their choice. But it is an illusion of a choice because they have to be there.
And also, I believe adding smaller gamified experiences that don't, I mean, if you really think about it and plan it right, that experiences that are gamified that don't intercept the arc, that don't, it also gives them a lot of freedom of choice and a chance to have a lot of fun without worrying about the actual overall story being interrupted or messed with.
Yes. Puzzles are the best babysitters for players. Just throw them a puzzle and you don't have to worry about them for the next hour.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about puzzles is you have three kinds of puzzles. The incredibly simple puzzle that they'll spend 4 hours trying to figure out. The moderate puzzle that half of them will figure out instantaneously and half of them will spend 4 hours trying to figure out. And the ridiculously hard puzzles that you're like, this will take them 4 hours, and 5 minutes later, like, we fixed it. And you're like, I asked you to tie your shoes, you couldn't. I asked you to solve physics, all of physics, and you did it in 5 minutes. What?
This is kind of what I really enjoy about running horror LARPs, though, is the unpredictability of the player.
Oh yeah.
Because my favorite thing about LARPs, I have ADHD. I cannot write a novel to save my life because I will get so hung up in what I expect my characters to do and if I'm making it too easy for them. But I can write a LARP like that because I'm just setting up dominoes for other people to knock down.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you are saying that if we do a Saw LARP, Jigsaw is doomed to fail because the better he thinks the puzzle is, the easier it's going to be to solve.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
that is the most unrealistic part about Saw, is someone would look at it, spend 5 minutes, and be like, he's the dead body on the floor. I figured this out already. And it'll be like, how? And you just started. You just woke up. And it's that guy. Figured it out. Done.
Actually, jumping off of Jigsaw, just to flow with that, one of the cool things you can do in a LARP scenario is promise somebody something that is going to happen, but don't tell them how or what or to whom, and you will immediately create tension. If you say someone is going to die before they leave this room, and you have established that this is the word of truth, or someone is going to betray you or something like that, you have immediately introduced tension into that game without fail. And it's amazing, if you have established legitimacy up to this point, you can lie at that point and ensure someone betrays somebody on their own.
One of my favorite plot lines in a LARP I was in was a character was this weird telepath who could see the future and told the entire town someone was going to betray the town and it was going to bring the end. And we all spent like 3 games freaking out over who was going to betray us, throwing wild accusations at everyone. And finally, the person who we all kept accusing was finally like, if you're all going to accuse me, I'm just going to betray the town. I'm just
Hell
gonna
yeah.
do it. And they joined the team bad guy and betrayed everyone. And we're all like, what the hell? And they're like, you already
You just
went to the
set
Salem
free
witch trials. You said I was guilty. So yeah, you are correct. If you create the word of law, this is what's going to happen, you almost self-prophesize by making people create the scenario that you're task wins in, which is a lot of fun, I find.
Yeah.
Next thing I want to talk about is realism in horror. When is making it personal a good thing, as much as when is too much too much? Yes.
Making it personal is the best thing when they ask you. That I know it's a simple, dumb answer,
So
but
many people miss it though. It's a
yes,
very valid point.
just the idea of when they ask you to make it personal is when you make it personal. Something I am thrilled by and that I've stolen from my own LARPs is a LARP I am in called Archangel Frame, which I was telling my fellow panelists about earlier, which is sort of Neon Genesis Evangelion with all of the serial numbers scrubbed off and
Right.
a liberal dose of gothic horror added.
It's never a bad choice.
I know, right? But something they did for every single character is they have a Google Doc that is their character's dossier. So you
Okay.
have all of your in-character information on the dossier, and then on the second page, you have all of the out-of-character information. So this is my actual name, these are my actual pronouns, this is what I want out of the game, this is what I want to happen to my character, these are things I cannot deal with, these are my triggers, these are experiences I want to avoid in this game. And every single name tag in that game has a QR code on it that you can scan and get to somebody's dossier in like 3 seconds.
Oh, that's really smart.
And I think that's a fabulous way of going about a horror LARP or even a cyberpunk LARP or something like that, because you have this power to read what your fellow players want at your fingertips.
Yeah. One of the first things that I was taught when I started running LARPs is just look at their character sheets. Look at the flaws that they have. If they have the ward flaw or the dependent flaw, like they want you to exploit the love that they have for this person or the obligation that they feel.
Yep.
If they have weaknesses, if they have dirty secrets, like exploit all of that, because when they put that on their sheet, they're communicating with you, this is the story I want.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I like to do is have backstories. Like, who was my character before I started this game? What's your character before you started this game? For the exact same reasons of, do you have that sister you don't really talk to? Do you have that enemy that you pissed off that one time because you stole something from them? Do you have that dirty little secret? Do you have a fake name? Are you trying to pretend to be someone else? You're giving the people who are running the game, or they are giving you the opportunity to interact with what they want you to interact with. And that's wildly powerful because you know where to go. And in my mind, personalized plots are really good, assuming they want it, because I'm a sucker for punishment and I love personalized plots. Yes, Matt?
Well, we cheat over Jackalope because all of our characters are pre-written, but what we have is you don't so much write your characters, you select them, but we very explicitly say what content is involved. And then what we do is we provide systems for negotiating in game, which the preview stuff is good, but just as important, and I think we're going to talk about this later, is the idea that you can adjust in time. Because one thing you should never be afraid of when you're doing a game is like deciding you're not okay with something. Sometimes you think you're a badass, and then when you're actually in the situation and you're not around a table, but you're there with the screaming and the lights, you realize you're not a badass, or that this is just not going a place that you think it's going to go. So never be afraid to communicate your needs during a game about how you're feeling. And even more importantly, we all kind of have a sense of when somebody is actually freaking out.
Mhm.
And it's very different than stage freaking out usually, especially amongst amateur actors like LARPers. And we should always be aware of that, because that allows us to basically no one wants to enjoy a horror experience in which they don't feel the people around them care about them enough to help them if something actually goes wrong.
Right.
Can I make something of a controversial statement here?
Sure.
Immersion is a false god, and people who prize emotion over players are bad players and bad GMs. That's
Fuck yeah. Sorry.
What do you mean by that? Are you, if I got the statement right, immersion's important, but it shouldn't be the god in this situation.
Yes, absolutely.
No, I agree.
Something I just want to follow up on something that Matthew said, and then I'll let you go if that's okay. It is easy to tell when people are actually freaking out, but in my experience, there are people who believe that if they have paid a certain amount of money for a LARP, then they should get to do whatever. And this is something I've seen people have to, this is something I've seen large LARPs fail at, is they go, oh, well, we did our safety workshop last time, so we don't have to do it this time. And if you're not constantly reminding your players, hey, you're playing with real people, you're playing with really important themes here, especially in a horror LARP where you're playing with these very delicate, vulnerable themes. If you're not constantly reminding them of that, then somebody freaking out to them is not going to look like somebody freaking out of game, because they're going to be so in their character's head that they're just going to keep rolling.
Yeah,
No.
and
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I've been in games where someone was having a real world freak out, and the person who caused it, who really should have known better, used that defense of like, oh, well, I thought they were just a really good role player.
Yep.
And so about 2 years ago, I went with this really cool workshop that was all about experience design. And so I went there as a LARPer, and there were people there who were in like all sorts of industries, and some of them had never played a LARP or an RPG before. But we were all interested in experience design, and that was my big takeaway, was that it's not about creating an immersive experience. It's more about creating like something that's memorable in a positive way. And so, with that in mind, like if you have to break immersion to take care of someone, you're still holding to the greater value of, I want this person to overall have a good experience.
Of course. And I think that's why the pregame is so important, right? Like I attended Night in Question, Matt's LARP, and we spent about 2 days with trust exercises and safety workshops and talking about consent. And even though we went through all that, once that was over, it wasn't like, okay, cool, game on. It was just everybody still had this awareness when we played, that we were there to take care of each other. And so I think that like team building beforehand is so important.
I like that a lot.
Matt?
Thank you. I mean, for those of you who aren't aware, the Night in Question is a game where we literally allow people to put hands on each other in a consensual manner. We have blood buckets and gore and takedowns, and it's very physical. Physicality is part of it. So the safety workshops are an absolute necessity. They're required. We close the doors at 1 o'clock and we say, if you are not in here, you are not playing. And I actually get LARPers to show up on time, which is a feat and a half, I'll tell you that much.
That is impressive. Oh, right.
But as far as people saying, well, I paid my money, I can do what I want, I've said to people, well, one of our mottos is people are more important than LARPs. And I've said to people who've had that attitude, it's like, I invite you to quote me an amount of money that is worth hurting somebody who came to me for fun. I've challenged them, quote me a number, because whatever you paid for your ticket isn't anywhere near it, I assure you. What the price for that would be.
Building that on that and Rachel's earlier point, I think it's very important to understand that the safety and the importance of your players far outweighs the immersion and the interest of the game, no matter what.
Yep.
Because let's say I was playing in your game, Matt, and I got hurt. I'm not saying your game's unsafe, just hypothetically speaking.
It happens.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened yet, but it's a possibility.
But,
people trip.
And I get hurt. I know for me personally, it would super suck to have like everyone else be like, oh, he twisted his ankle / whatever, and just be like, oh, we're just gonna walk over him because it's not important.
Seen it happen.
It's bad though.
Yep.
Well, I was just going to say that one important thing to jump off of that is, and I do this to take place because it's just what I'm used to at meetings.
No, it's a
don't feel
great
like
idea.
No,
interrupt
it's
Draw
yourself.
attention.
Yeah, if it's this and this and this, depending on which order you're in. So one of the things to keep in mind when you're running a game and planning a game is that the level of risk should directly determine the level of monitoring observation you have. At the night in question, we're dealing with flashing lights and growling and monsters and people actually grabbing other people and stuff like that. That's why we have like a 10-man safety team or more
I love
with
that.
like patrol zones. We actually, amusingly, we actually went to like BDSM clubs and asked them, what's your system for like dungeon monitoring and stuff? We mimic that because those
Matthew,
people have been
Good
doing
way
it for
to go,
decades.
though.
I'm
Yeah,
falling in love with you. I hope you know that.
I'm easy to fall in love with. I'm also homophobic. But it's we use that system with like zones and like people who patrol between zones, and all of them have flags on it, and we have that level of monitoring because we need it, and we also need it to make sure the players see that these people are there, so that if the person, and we use these high visibility vests, which paradoxically makes them easy to ignore because you can look at that person and say, oh, they're not a character, they're a
Yep.
safety team member. And they feel safer doing that stuff, but also we need that level of coverage. And like we have a medical tent, we have 2 registered nurses that are on site during that. So
Yeah.
when you're dealing with horror, very few other games have the necessity for that, even battle games. But you need to look at the level of risk you're dealing with and what you're dealing with, the psychological and the physical risks. And you need to gauge up your monitoring. Safety workshopping is 100% essential, but you need dedicated people who aren't going to get distracted by the shiny plot to look at these things and deal with them.
Yeah,
Something. Go ahead.
sorry. Oh, well, I was in a long-running offer game, which decided that they were going to pivot and run a really dark, horrifying story. Uh, and I really wish that they had had a chance to hear that last 5 minutes 2 years ago, because certain people might still be friends.
Oh no.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it just it was people who were really unprepared to take on the responsibility of running really deep, potentially traumatic stories. And it created a lot of bad feeling because I think a lot of people had really strong emotional reactions. It was bleed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The worst bit is as I'm listening to you tell this story and I'm like, wow, I know at least 3 LARPs that have done that, because there's this sort of culture of, well, it's just a game and we're all a bunch of responsible people anyway, and we don't need to do this, that, and the other because we're all friends. And it's really easy to test that friendship, shall we say politely, um,
Yeah.
when you're putting them in a pressure cooker, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
And
I mean, lizard brain don't care. That's one of
For
the
you,
things I
Jackie.
say.
yeah, absolutely.
Lizard brain, like monkey brain might understand this is make believe. Lizard brain just sees screaming and emotions.
Yep. You're
And lizard brain is real,
I
and
mean,
emotions are real even if the game is fake.
oh yeah,
right, that's a really
absolutely.
good point, is that when you're feeling LARP fear, your brain doesn't know the difference, and so you
No.
still get the same fear hormones. And so, yeah, it's a greater risk, and you need to have better preparation to deal with that.
At the LARP I help run Evan Rock, one of the calls that I'm a huge proprietor of is Clarify, which is a very simple clarify, are you actually okay? Clarify, what does this mean? And it's come up, like I've used it, I help run the game, and there's been times where players are that good at crying where I'm like, clarify, are you okay? And like, oh yeah, fine. I'm like, okay.
Something that I've seen that's distressed me a couple of times is certain big name wizard LARPs that I won't name here, had safety teams like Matt was talking about, and are very much into like this, oh, we're enlightened and we're intersectional and we're all caring for each other. And then they got so into this headspace of we're all caring for each other that they then got rid of their safety team, because we're all so enlightened and we care about each other, and why do we need a safety team? And something that both Rachel and Matthew said was talking about the lizard brain. And there's a whole thing on polyvagal theory that I could go into here, where your cognition actually drops into different parts of your body depending on how afraid you are. So like normal and okay is up here, and then like your nervous system actually drops into different parts of your body when you go into fight, flight, and freeze.
Okay.
And when you're in something like freeze, the easiest thing to do to tell people who are saying, clarify, are you okay, are you okay, is, oh yeah, I'm totally okay, because then it gets them to go away.
Yeah,
seen it.
Yeah.
I have a friend out here in Los Angeles, and she wrote, she was studying to become a psychologist, and she wrote a thesis paper on how immersive horror in particular is therapeutic. And so like we are dealing with something that's, you know, psychological, and it affects different people different ways, and especially newcomers to this type of game and entertainment might not know even how it will affect them. So you can't, you know, if it's, I think, you know, if it's you in the same like small group of, you know, 15 friends doing your thing, you all know each other, it's a closer knit group, that's fine. But if you're running a large game and you have new people coming in, you really don't know how it's going to affect somebody to go through these experiences.
No, absolutely.
There are absolute limits on what we can simulate. We're really bad at simulating our emotional reactions to things, or else all our arguments would go on like those ones we have with ourselves in the shower.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but no, I think the thing that Matthew was saying about how having that safety briefing and making that mandatory and making sure we all share the same language, or at least have a similar language for, hey, here's how I'm feeling, here's how I'm actually feeling, here's how I'm bleed feeling, here's how, you know, here's how you can care for me. Making that standardized, and or like not standardizing it across all games, but each game having its own sort of like language that players can access when they're not really thinking with full brain.
Yeah. Matt?
One thing I would point out, if anyone's thinking about exploring horror themes or running a LARP, is that the jackalope-larp.com, you'll find the Jackalope Guide to LARPing Hard and Safe. It's both a website and a PDF. And we actually make that free to distribute for any nonprofit game or private personal game. If you're for profit, we'll talk. But basically, if you want like a good starting point for what Jax was talking about, you can go, and it's fully illustrated, and you can just use that if you want, or you can play off of it. Several games have just said, hey, can we take it? And eventually we just said, this is important enough. It covers our safety and calibration mechanics. So you can go around and you can just use this with the stuff that we paid for and wrote. So that's a good place to start to look at that if you're thinking about running a game, because like you said, more people need to use them.
Sorry.
This kind of goes into the next point that I wanted to get into, which is breathing, letting players decompress between scenes. And I think it's a very important thing for people to be able to do, to just breathe. Yeah.
Decompression, so important. And I am actually on the safety and horror gaming, safety in horror gaming panel tomorrow. Words. You could tell I'm a writer because I do the words good. But I have chronic and complicated PTSD for a lot of reasons, and something that I know will fuck me up as both a player and a GM is if I don't get time to decompress. And that is something that I try and give to all of my players, because you're not going to come into this knowing everybody's personal backstory and everybody's list of diagnoses, or everybody's, you know, how everybody handles things. So having that time to decompress, just even a couple minutes, or even the dinner break, is so important.
It very is. Rachel?
Yeah, I think decompression is important, like +1 to everything that you just said. And you also need to give appropriate content tags to what you're running.
Yes.
So in the example that I referred to a couple minutes ago, when you know the fantasy lab decided to go horrific, you know they did do a lot of appropriate tags. So like, okay, this is going to be a game about genocide, and it's going to be a game about torture. And so, people could go in knowing what the game was about, but they didn't really notice that they also were including a lot of violence against women.
Oh boy.
And so, if you wanted to get important plot information, you had to read a couple pages of what was basically torture porn.
Oof.
And
There's-
and I think what made it
Wow.
worse was that this was a game with like really strong, like no sexual assault in character at all. Doesn't exist in this world, which is normally very, very good. But in this particular case, they're like, okay, well, we can't have that. How can we make up for it?
Oh no.
And instead of saying like this happened, it was bad, it was like this happened and this happened and this happened. And I'm like reading this.
No.
Yeah,
What were
so
they
and
thinking?
Yeah.
and like if it was a Sabat game, I would go in knowing, okay, this is a Sabat game, these are the tags, I'm prepared for it, but just having it out of the blue, so and it wasn't malicious, it was just thoughtless.
Yeah.
So the best advice I have is, really focus on what your tags are. And like
Matt,
be mindful about it.
I know you had a point you wanted to bring up earlier.
Well, I mean, I was just you have to tag everything. You have to repeat those tags at least twice. You have to make sure, and you have to make sure everybody has the option to tap out and has a way of tapping out. And in addition, I mean, kind of sidewinding back to what we're doing to it, the breaks in the conversation, the release of tension, is going to actually make the horror better.
Yep.
It's going to give the emotional context. I think you can't have it you have to keep the momentum, and that's an art unto itself, and doing it right for 100 people is never going to be perfect. But it also gives you a chance to what I've often referred to in LARP design as the quarter pounder with cheese conversations, which are the point. The point of Pulp Fiction is not the shooting the guys in the apartment. The point of Pulp Fiction is the conversation about quarter pounders with cheese in the car on the way there. And
Yeah.
I think that's a valid point about LARP in general, but specifically, like you have to consider all of this stuff. And you can even get like the very idea that involves bugs or screaming in loud lights. You need to be, because there's this leftover thing from tabletop gaming that finds its way into LARP, where the DM or the GM is supposed to surprise you. And
Oh my God.
yeah, because it's like leftover from when we had wargaming scenarios and stuff. And you just have to leave that behind. I mean, don't tell them everything, but just tell them there's going to be a lot of blood in the room. You don't have to give them a
Yeah.
photograph ahead of time.
No,
Yeah.
you're
Tell them.
absolutely right. Jacqueline?
Something I wanted to sort of go off of Rachel's point is, one, violence against women is often used as background noise in LARP,
Yeah.
which kills me. And two, something interesting about LARP, horror LARP specifically, I never write simulated torture into my horror LARPs, ever. I don't think it improves the plot. I don't think it improves the atmosphere necessarily. The best simulation of torture I ever saw was in a game with 3 people, and it was a witch trial, and somebody could break a stick to indicate that they were torturing someone because you just had this loud crack in the room that stopped all play. And that's really what torture should be, is just this horrifying freeze in the game,
I
right?
really like that. I like that.
And so many horror LARPs make the mistake of using torture as like, oh yeah, it's definitely going to get information out of someone. They're definitely going to answer it in the way you want them to. And so many of them miss that answering in the way you want them to isn't answering you truthfully. And so they often get conflated. And so a lot of LARPs end up using torture as a way to get information out of people and then condoning it. And then it gets really weird and icky. And so I'm not a huge fan of that ever. And I don't know, I also just really like the point that Matthew brought up, which is you don't have to surprise the players. You can keep them in suspense because they can know that the bomb is under the table, and they can know that they're sitting at that table, and their players can be screaming at their characters, "There's a bomb under the table that you're sitting at right now." but you don't have to surprise and catch the players off guard and potentially put them in a situation that is painful in a way they don't want it to be.
Right. Matt?
Well, now it's my turn to disagree wholeheartedly, or at least
Cool.
I don't disagree with your point about torture, because I literally run a game where we have a bin labeled torture toys.
Oh, good.
But the purpose of it in like the night in question is extremely different, because we have characters who are players who are playing NPC victims,
Right.
and that's what they signed up for. And it is the players who actually use the torture toys, quote unquote, or the murder toys, depending on how we use them.
Right.
But it's never portrayed as a way of getting information. It's portrayed as a way of, congratulations, you wanted to be the badass monster, go be a monster. We're going to watch.
Okay.
We're going to make you do things that you didn't want to do. And that, I know we discussed a little bit ahead of the panel, but that's actually, one of the unique things that you rarely see outside of games, and you rarely see outside of LARP, is participatory horror, where players are invited to be the slasher and to do that. And one thing I've noticed is that no way takes away the horror of it. That the being the killer is often genuinely more disturbing and more engaging. But if I want to hear your if, because it's probably the same if I'm about to say.
If you have the self-awareness to understand the horror of what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're not using it as a power trip.
Rachel, what was your point?
Yeah, I just want to make a really quick point that, we're talking about torture to get information out of someone, and that's just an excuse.
Yes.
And the real purpose to torture someone is to hurt them, to humiliate them, to make an example of them. We sort of have internalized this idea that you torture someone for information because of like shows like 24, any of us who lived through the Bush administration.
Yep.
And that is not why you torture someone. And yeah, so if you want to incorporate torture into your horror LARP, like be aware of what its true purpose is.
Right.
Yeah, very much.
agree very wholeheartedly. I know in the game I run, there's a character who is a serial killer. The player is just a bad person. So every other game or so, they get to go on a mod where they choose the victim who they chose in BGAs, be like, I want that person. And they go hunt them down. It's always been an NPC, but like they're aware that what they're doing is horribly wrong. And at some point, they're going to get caught and horribly killed for it.
Cool.
But it's what they want to do, and as long as they're aware what they're doing is bad and it will lead to bad things for them in time, assuming they're caught and all that other jazz, I'm all for, in this case, the torture, because it's a payoff to the later end. Matt?
Well, one of the things that's particularly sick about torture is it's a sign of a society which cares more about results than the truth. And just to if you want some cementing on this, go read The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Ooh, or sorry, I have another recommendation too.
Okay.
As well. A Question of Torture by Alfred McCoy is probably my favorite book on this.
Absolutely. And just like the level of rot that mentality implies in a culture is stunning. And the thing is that torture is something which is done to dehumanize literally everyone involved. And that's the way it's been since the Spanish Inquisition, which is where I think that's really where we get this baggage from, is from good old fashioned witch hunt.
Confess.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Don't be boring.
One of my favorite quotes on this subject is actually from a comic book. Who here knows The Punisher? Somebody made the comments of, if you kill a killer, there's still an equal amount of killers in the world. And Frank Miller's response was, right, but if I kill them all, there's only me, and I can be dealt with. And it's a very Dexterian style mentality. I don't know who's familiar with the show Dexter, but it's about a sociopath serial killer who says, well, I need to kill because that's who I am. Let me kill bad guys.
And then we can get into a whole discussion over the depiction of sociopathy in Dexter. But oh, by the way, if you're going to depict mental illness in your LARP, maybe talk to people who are mentally ill first.
Yeah.
Like,
Dealing
hi, I'm
with
a sensitivity reader. I'll
Yeah.
happily read your stuff for money.
Dealing with mental illnesses specifically is a very touchy subject because you can either do it right or you can do it horribly wrong, and there's nothing in between.
Yep.
Matt?
The only option you have with most fictional depictions is to make it very, very clear that what you are dealing with is something that a psychologist, if pressed and desperate, might call a mental illness, but is actually something of a supernatural source.
Yes.
Such as if you're dealing with, like in World of Darkness, you're dealing with the Malkavians or mages with quiet. I like the shift that's happened where it's just like, yes, if you threw these people into a psychologist's office and they tried to diagnose them, they might diagnose them as schizophrenic. But this is science trying to find something real to attach this to. What is actually existing is something supernatural and should not be conflated with real mental illness. That is the best you can do, and it's not always going to work.
Right.
One of the really interesting places if you want to go for supernaturally induced, we'll call it aberrance for right now because it's not actually mental illness. Somewhere you would go for that is actually the TV show Criminal Minds.
That's great, by the way.
I know, it's so good, but it's an excellent source of, oh, these people say it's a mental illness, but in a lot of ways, especially in certain seasons, it is something supernatural. And they have this whole thing about the actual supernatural metaphysics of Criminal Minds, because like there are a lot of things that could be hallucinations, could actually be happening. And if you want to play with the horror of something that is something outside affecting your mind and that is not actually mental illness, Criminal Minds would be where I'd suggest to get that from.
Matt?
Well, I mean, jumping off of that, even in the like real world with Hannibal and Red Dragon and all that kind of stuff, there's this mythos about serial killers all being these elegant, hyper intelligent, cultured people. And that is a fun trope. Everyone likes the well-spoken killer. But in reality, if you look at serial killers, they're often childish, angry, horrible, misshapen, unhappy people. And whenever you play with, I am always hesitant to saying you can't play with these things, but whenever you do so, you have to, whenever the horror is from another human and not from the great troll from underneath the stairs or whatever, you run the risk of really perpetuating some bad ideas about these things, and you should at least be aware of them when you approach them.
Oh, absolutely. If you're not careful specifically with that kind of thing, you, instead of trying to tell a good story, you're just telling people, I'm a shitty human being, suck it up. And nobody wants to be that guy. And
Babe, when someone tells you who they are, believe them.
yeah. There's a character I play in Ebon Rock who is the absolute worst, but he's, again, going to that supernatural thing. He's a sociopathic serial killer. He's also hopped up on vampire blood, so he's not really human anymore. It's you can explain things a certain way as long as you're willing to accept that you're deviating from humanity.
Yes. So I think probably my favorite assessment of serial killers ever was the Ted Bundy tapes, where all of the men are like, he's such a genius. How could he have done this? I don't know. I don't understand how he got out from under our thumb. I don't get it. And all the women are like, yeah, he was a child and a jerk. And I've seen 1,000 of these before. So
yeah.
I think the funny thing about all this is that, the duality of good and evil, really in us, in humanity, it's not a duality, it's a spectrum. And I think people are more complicated than good and bad, and I think our mental health isn't just like pass fail too. I think that there's a lot going on. And that's why I love playing monsters. I have so much fun playing a monster and doing these things I wouldn't normally do. A therapist.
I always volunteer to play the antagonist.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's so fun to explore that side of yourself too. And a therapist that I knew once said to me that you know, sometimes people who have faced abuse and faced a lot of darkness in their life, they can easier understand people who commit dark acts just because they've been close to them and they have empathy for them. So I think that, you know, sometimes in doing what we do, it's important to just always maintain empathy for everybody in the game and
Oh yeah.
understand if somebody, you know, takes something the wrong way, you know, apologize. And if someone's apologizing, you know, try and just make it clear what bothered you and then try to understand where they're coming from and forgive them too. That's hard to say because there are obviously lines that are crossed, and when those lines are crossed, it's no
Oh
good.
yeah.
You're out of here, you know, goodbye. But we're dealing with very sensitive subjects.
Matt.
So one of the things we released as part of our educational stuff on Jackalope is the 5 healthy reasons to play an antagonist or play a villain. And one of them, I believe, is called apharaxis, which is a Greek term, and is literally to understand the thing by briefly becoming it. And by it's used in some psychological treatments as well. So it's not necessarily bad to play the monster. A friend of mine who's a psychologist who's also an actor, he's a dangerous person, he said that everyone has dark thoughts. It's just a question of what you do with them. And it's actually the least healthy thing is to never find an outlet for them.
Yep.
Never find outlet for your anger and stuff like that. I think Jung called it playing with shadow, and it's important.
Shadow work, yeah.
I have a
Yep.
lot to say about LARP and the shadow, but I think we're out of time.
We've got about a minute left. So one of my final thoughts I'll point out is one of my favorite quotes of all time, which is, "You're the bad guy in somebody's story." Remember that everyone has a different filter for how they see the world and how they see those around them. Just because you think you're the good guy or other people think you're the good guy doesn't mean that someone else isn't looking at you and saying, "Wow, what a dick."
Some of us don't need to be reminded that.
So I make a lot of fun of Stephen King because I find Stephen King very overwritten in a lot of ways, even though The Stand is one of my favorite stories ever. But one of the things he said that I think still sticks with me, just to, you know, really bookend this with Stephen King quotes, because that's what we want to do with the LARP
Yeah.
panel. God help me.
Yes.
But okay, I'll talk to you later, God. But he said that horror is visiting the alligators in your brain, and you keep the alligators in a canal under a trapdoor, and sometimes the alligators get hungry. And if you don't feed the alligators their small doses of, you know, that anger that you're feeling, or that sadness that you're feeling, or that helplessness that you're feeling, if you don't allow yourself to sit with those feelings and really experience those feelings, you're gonna wind up more fucked up than you already are.
If you don't feed those alligators, they're going to leave that canal.
Yeah.
Art is the task of making peace with wild dogs.
Hell yeah.
With that, I believe we are out of time. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you for coming in and speaking. And I hope everyone watching has enjoyed horror and LARPing.
Can we pimp our Twitters real quick?
Absolutely. Jacqueline?
So you can find me on Twitter at RuffleJacks. All of my links are there. So I would love it if you came and followed me and said hi.
You can follow us at Jackalope LARP or me at Matt Stormcrow.
I'm Stolen Fire. Stolen_fire.
All right. And Shayne?
On Twitter, I'm a slight sprite.
I'm on Twitter. I'm Daniel, but I don't really use it. You probably want to use the Gehenna Gaming Twitter account. It should be attached everywhere on here. And thank you everyone for watching. I appreciate it all. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
This is a real pleasure, guys.
Thank you for being a wonderful audience.
Bye.
Bye.